Chapter 16 of the Science of Mind textbook is entitled The Principles of Successful Living. Well, we're already doing that, right? I want to hear a big old yes.
Yes.
Yes, we are. And do we want more?
Yes.
Absolutely. That's what we came here to experience. So, in religious science, the science of the mind is what we teach. We are religious scientists, and we were originally called religious science, and we often refer to ourselves as Science of Mind, Centers for Living. We have many, many names. So does God, so that's a good thing. But the science of the mind is based upon the theory that we are part of one universal mind, and we use it by thinking into it. Our thinking then sets the law in motion. The law is infinite in its nature. There is no limit in law. However, there does appear to be a limit in our understanding of it, of law, of God. Because as our understanding of principles increase, we seem to achieve greater possibilities. Every invention that was ever created is an example of how this principle works, in the simple fact that the idea for the invention had always been available. However, it wasn't demonstrated until it was, until one person utilized the law in a way that made the idea, the invention, demonstrate. Everything around us, just look around you, everything around us in our physical world is a demonstration for the way the law works, because back of it, there is only the divine. And these examples of how law works while surrounding us are also the point that we can use law in our own life by learning to understand it. Ernest Holmes says it is entirely possible through mental treatment, through right thought and belief, to greatly influence our environment, its reaction to us, the situations we meet, and the conditions we contact. So we have tools that we use for this purpose, mindfulness tools such as prayer or affirmative treatment, meditation, and today we're going to engage in visioning, which is also a tool we can use. They provide us pathways forward to look away from conditions that now exist and mentally accept better ones, accept the ones that we desire. As we have been talking about the past few weeks, this process of mental acceptance must be so deeply impressed by us into our conscious thinking that it becomes a subjective embodiment. Ernest Holmes says we are healed by making our statements become a subjective realization. That means they must be more than just our conscious thinking. They must go into the subconscious realm, that which is under. It's important to create a mental picture of the desired condition. And since we don't get something for nothing, we know we can bring about greater health, happiness, and a quality of life. But we aren't going to get it for nothing. What we have to give is our mental willingness to surrender to understanding laws better, God better. We know that we can't change law. Therefore, it is important that we understand it, comply with it, and use it rightly. And using it rightly consists of attaining, as Ernest Holmes says, an adequate subjective image, which does not contradict the nature of the universe, but will take form and will manifest. David's going to talk about that quote a little bit more. Using it rightly means that we are looking at providing an adequate subjective image within our own mind through our own thinking that will demonstrate in the way we desire. We must remember that the law is impersonal. So it simply takes the subjective image that we place into it and returns it to the thinker. For us, this means whatever is mentally set into law during treatment mustn't be contradicted by our daily routine of thinking. We must stay the course. I don't know about you, but I do notice myself falling off that path sometimes. I go into treatment and I absolutely know what I need to know and create that subjective image within myself, and I'm absolutely positive of it. And then I start living my life and looking at some of the things going on in it and fall off the wagon. And I have to climb back on and say, no, I am not going to see it that way. I am going to see it the way that I am seeing it in treatment, because that's what I desire. And the greatest idea is going to win. So we exist to express ourselves. We exist to enjoy our experiences right here and right now. And the more we are loving life, the greater opportunity we get to provide for spirit to experience life through us. Because spirit, being consciousness, experiences through form, just like we do. We are powerfully created with the mental ability to plant an idea into the law of mind and experience it in form for ourselves. And you're going to talk more about that, yes?
Absolutely. I'm going to try to. This topic for me has been a little challenging this week, and the more I look at it, the more I go down rabbit holes and think about a whole lot of other things, but that tells me that it means something much more expansive, I guess. Did you ever talk about contradictions a little bit ago? And I find that sometimes we have a lot of contradictions as we go through life. I think it's because the more I go through this thing, the more I realize we're balancing our spirituality with our humanity. And we're balancing that which is one with the internal realm of possibility, and that which is my space ends where yours begins. And living in this place where I do literally have limitation, but I have to recognize that those limitations are only perceived limitations within my mind. Although I do know that bumping into other people shows that limitation, a physical limitation, I do know that that is nothing but atomic energy showing up as other forms in this same space where I am. And so therefore, I have a lot of challenges in dealing with that. Ernest Holmes says something at the very beginning of this chapter that I found pretty contradictory to everything else that he says. He says, we do not teach that you can get what you want. Now, haven't we been talking all year about if you want something in your life, well, you have to hold that in consciousness and create a belief system around it and release it to universal law and then let it manifest. Haven't we been talking about that all year? And he says, we do not teach that you get what you want. If we could all get what we want, it might be disastrous. For it is certain that most of us would want things that would interfere with the well-being of someone else. So doesn't that show us that place where we're living in this contradictory idea of me being all that is, being the expression of God in human form, and yet that human form of it showing a little bit of conflict and limitation. It might be disastrous if we could all get exactly what we want, because it would most likely interfere with the well-being of someone else. I think that in simple terms, it's understood that if it was just me, I could hold consciousness and receive everything that I wanted, and I could have everything that I want, because there would be no one else for me to interact with, no one that I could interfere with, and interfere with their well-being. But we live in a complex experience here, in this life experience. And so things shift a little bit when we start talking about just me and God. And me and God as all that is. And so, can we really have all we want? Yes, we do. We have to think about it in a different way. Eugene Wigner was a Hungarian theoretical physicist, and he talks a lot about quantum science. And you know, I keep saying, okay, I'm not going to talk quite so much about quantum science because people keep telling me when you do that, my brain hurts and you lose me, and I don't exactly know what you're talking about, and I have to come back to it a little bit later. And when you get back into the stuff, I understand it. It makes sense to me. And I realize, you know, what I need to do is, Einstein says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So I'm going to keep trying to explain it until I can explain it simply so you can understand exactly why. I think it's really important to understand these things. I think there's some fascinating ideas around indeterminacy and the problem of quantum measurement and so on that have to do with the idea of infinite possibilities and the nature of God. And to me, they're interchangeable. To me, in fact, probably the one term that I like most when I talk about God is the realm of infinite possibility. That makes sense to me, and it liberates me from a whole lot of other spiritual jargon. And so it makes sense to me. Anyway, Eugene Wigner was talking about this idea that we get what we want through collapsing possibility waves into form. And he said, so imagine that we have to deal with other people in the process. So in 1961, he proposed a provocative thought experiment in which he questioned what would happen when applying quantum mechanics of an observer, as one observer, and then adding another observer to that observer. So not only do we have one person observing what's happening, but we have another observing what that person is observing at the same time. Would that change the entire process of manifestation, of how things become manifest form? So imagine a friend tossing a coin. And whenever you toss a coin, it's called superposition, because whenever the coin is flying in the air, it could possibly be heads, and it could possibly be tails. And so you could say, like Schrodinger's cat, it's both heads and tails at the same time. Like Schrodinger's cat is alive and dead at the same time in the box. When the coin is flying through the air, it is heads and tails, both at the same time. It is not neither or. It is both at the same time. So imagine he's throwing that coin up in the air and then catching it and then writing down what is happening. And for him, he's in this condition where he's actually one with the coin in the process as he's flipping the coin up in possibilities, 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 manifestation. But he is still part of the process because he's the one that's throwing the coin up in the air. And so he's entangled with the coin as this process is happening. Meanwhile, Wigner is watching the whole process going on. And Wigner is observing what's going on to him, the observer, and the coin at the same time. So as the guy, his friend, and the coin are entangled, so therefore are Wigner, his friend, and the coin entangled in the process all at the same time. Now we can keep adding and adding and adding to that until we get into a room full of people observing what's happening to each individual person. We are all intertangled. We are all held together, entangled, as Einstein called a spooky connection. We're all part of the one process. So Wigner also talks about the idea that if there are two people sitting at a light and we're waiting for the light to turn green, for whom will the light turn green? Will it be the person who has the greatest consciousness? The person who's done more good stuff in their lives than the other person? Who has more karma in their lives? For whom will the light turn? And the answer is that we are all one, we're all interconnected, we're all entangled together in the one process that's happening at the time. And so both people sitting at the light and the light are all entangled as one energy. So therefore, whatever light the light turns to is good for both, because we are all one in life. Does that make sense? That's quantum science in a nutshell. But it's also an idea of spirituality, the same thing, where we live in a complex society in which we are so many of us hoping to give that which we wish to receive, and everybody else is wishing to receive exactly the same thing. It's like people that are at a football game. The crowd on this side is praying for one thing, the crowd on this side is praying for another thing, and the people in the center are just having a good time. But the people, all the people in the stadium, and the football, and the player, and the refs are all of one energy at the same time. And so wouldn't it be less exciting if we only got what we wanted in a football game? It might be exciting for a little while, but generally speaking, it would be kind of a boring thing to go to a football game knowing we're going to win, we're going to get certain goals, we know exactly what's going to happen. Why would I want to go? Life is different than that. Life is ever so much more complex. The nature of God is so much more complex than that simple idea of which we wish to experience in the now moment. So therefore, life is more complex and life is more expansive. So as Deborah said, we need to look away from the conditions which now exist while accepting better ones. If we only look at that which we have, we will never understand the possibilities of getting to there where we wish to be. So we, as expressions of God, basically, yeah, we're telling God what to do, but we're not telling God how to do it. And so we are expressing our desires, our wishes, that which we wish to experience, and letting them manifest, but we're not telling God how to make them manifest, because that's part of a bigger complex situation. And so therefore we leave it alone, let go and let God. No person whose entire time is spent in the contemplation of limitation can demonstrate freedom from such limitation. And quite often, living in this human form, we experience limitations, so therefore it becomes part of who we are. And so therefore we can't possibly tell God how to bring about that which we want to experience. According to divine law, whenever and wherever there's an adequate subjective image which does not contradict the nature of the universe, the image will not only tend to take form, but will take form and will manifest. We did not create this law, and we can't change this law. This is a God law. It does happen. We don't know how it's going to happen, but we do know that it will happen. And that's because spiritual man is already a success. He's already supplied with everything that he needs. The potential of all things exists in the universal wholeness, the oneness, the process of all that is.
Well, I'm going to back you up a little bit with the idea that Ernest Holmes, in his later life, did start looking at quantum. And so I foresee that quantum is going to support our teaching very much in the future. Well, yes, it does, and I think we're going to see, all of us. Well, maybe not us. It depends how long you plan to stay here.
What I'd like to say about this teaching, when we talk about ourselves as religious scientists, is the idea that we use science to prove the nature of God.
Yes, so one of the examples for the ideas David was sharing with me earlier in this week, I was saying, you know, I remember experiencing a moment in time where everything collapsed into that one moment. And it was a time in my life when I was experiencing in the physical realm a couple of different experiences that were both out of my control and hurtful. And it was very easy for me to settle into my humanity. But when I would settle into my humanity, I started to notice how I physically didn't feel well. I started to notice how I couldn't think about anything else because my mind was just thinking about what I could do with these two situations that I had going on. And so I knew, of course, exactly what to do, and that was to treat for myself, to move into meditation, and to know the truth. and to know peace. And so I did, and I got to that place where I absolutely did not see the form, only saw the one life, knew that I still had to deal with the form in my own way, but was able to truly feel the peace. That isn't the moment of collapsing the perfect possibility and the understanding of one life. That came when I questioned myself, how am I feeling throughout this day so peaceful, so calm, so gentle with myself, when these two things are still going on, and in previous days they just absorbed my attention. And in that moment, that's the moment where it just collapsed into one possibility, which was the one. There is only one life. And that life of God is peaceful, it is abundant, it is all love, it is all joy. And we are each heir to that. And it is our mistaken thinking that brings us into anything less. It doesn't mean we won't have to deal in the physical as long as we're in this human body. It does mean that we can experience more peaceful, more loving experience as we walk through it. And one of the keys to getting there is something else that I wanted to talk about that Ernest Holmes talks about in this chapter. Some may say that they don't know how or what choice to make. Well, we say with Ernest Holmes, there is an intelligence in you that does know. And if you can come around to realizing that that intelligence is within you, something frees up that you can let go and know that you will know in the right moment. And that idea will encapsulate into itself within you. Meditation is the perfect practice to know and to receive guidance within, to trust the inner voice. In our teaching, we often say intuition is spirit knowing itself. Every right idea is already known in the mind of God. That peace I was talking about is of God. It is of the truth of life. And so we are meant to take the best and to know that there's plenty. Your taking never deprives others of their good. You can have all the good you want. We are working with the greatest mental law of the universe. It is always available. It is never depleted. It is infinite. It is unlimited. And it is responsive to our subjective image with reciprocal demonstrations. And so, to go back to that title, success and happiness are already yours. Enjoy them. And so it is.